But in all the later chronicles, Muslim records, this Nand Rishi is named as Sheikh Nuruddin Wali. And this was the name given by none other than Shah Hamdan. So, many Kashmiri Hindu scholars who have written biographies of Lalla, they have refuted these legends. And unfortunately, we don't see any contemporary sources that talk about Lalla's life. So we can say that Lalleshwari was born as a Hindu. So obviously, it's impossible that she can even be called a Sufi. She had a Diksha and all that. What about Ras Khan? Was he a Krishnite Sufi? Let's probe that. Topic of our talk today is Lalleshwari and Ras Khan. Are they Sufi mystics or Hindu saints? Why we even need to talk about something like this? Do we even have an inch of doubt, an iota of doubt about these great saints? Absolutely no. But unfortunately, the conditions which we live in are not very conducive for Hindu civilization and for Dharma. So the misrepresentation of all things Hindu is like an ongoing project by the enemies of our civilization. And one of them is this misrepresentation of Bhakti saints as something else. So specifically, the medieval Bhakti saints as Sufi mystics. So this is really what I call as a de-Hinduization project. So what I mean by de-Hinduization? So it operates at two levels. First, you take a substantial a civilizational aspect or core. So take Kashmiri culture, Kashmiri literature, or say Tamil culture. So you take any regional culture in our country, it is filled with the Hindu civilizational themes. I mean, there is nothing other than the Hindu ethos in any literature or culture of any region in India. That's the fact. So what they do is they separate the Hindu elements, or they portray a picture as if the culture and literature of that particular region is somewhat secular, somewhat it's nothing connected to religion. And whether someone is a Muslim or a Christian, let's say living in some region of India, say Karnataka. So just to make them own that regional culture, they attempt to de-Hinduize the whole thing. So it is one thing to create a sense of belonging, which is good, but to completely falsify a historical fact for that purpose is something like an evil, which we need to call out. The other aspect of de-Hinduization is that take a lofty and noble thing in Hindu Dharma, say yoga or Bharatanatyam, or let's say classical music, and portray that as something not connected with religion at all. So yoga is not Hindu, Bharatanatyam is not Hindu, Ayurveda is not Hindu. So this is another aspects of de-Hinduization project. So this is happening in both academic level as well as in popular narratives. So as you see, what provoked me to make a post about this in Facebook is that Amar Chitra Katha, which we all think is a great tool to introduce children to Hindu culture. So they just made this announcement in their website, Lalleshwari Lalde, Sufi mystic. Now that's atrocious. So to call a Shiva Yogini as Lalleshwari, as a Sufi mystic, is to mislead a whole generation of children. And that too, when we know Amar Chitra Katha is read widely all over the world. And there was this other article in Outlook magazine, Raskan, a medieval Krishnite Sufi. I don't know what that even means. A Krishnite Sufi, Ramite Sufi, Shivite Sufi. What kind of terms these are? So first you de-Hinduize an element, a cultural element, then you let it be appropriated by Christians or Muslims or by atheists or whoever it is, and project it as something like an orphaned thing. And in this case, so once you de-Hinduize the saints, they become Sufi. And then they say that the Sufi is always a cool thing. If a youngster says, I am going for a puja or a bhajan sandhya, her friends will ask, hey, kya yaar, what is this? All old fashioned. But if she says, let's go to a Sufi music festival, then that becomes a very cool thing. So on one hand, they make youngsters become averse to the Hindu cultural elements, which is their native tradition, and make things like Sufi sound very cool. So this is something that is happening at the popular level. So this needs to be exposed and called out, and that is the purpose of this talk. Let's begin with Lalleshwari. So Lalleshwari, we all know, is a Kashmira Shaiva yogini. So I'll give a bit of a historical detail to start with. She was born as Lalla in a Brahmin Kashmiri Pandit family in a place. So the scholars, there is a difference whether it is Sempur or Pandranthan, near Srinagar, in 14th century, so around 1320 Common Era. So this is a time just before the Muslim rule started in Kashmir, with Shah Mir betraying the Kota Rani and her sons and usurping the throne. So just before the Islamic dominance started in Kashmir, there was the advent of this great yogini. Perhaps there is a divine premonition in this event. And she attained Mahasamadhi in a place Bijbehra in Kashmir around 1373. So Lalleshwari was married at a very young age, like 11 or 12 years. And the legends say that she had a bitter experience with her mother-in-law, and in general the family life, because she was very spiritually oriented from childhood, and so she left the worldly life soon in spiritual quest. And she had received her first diksha from their Kulaguru, who was called Shitikanta or Shrikanta. So in the Kashmiri dialect, he is called Sed Boyu. So some scholars say the name is Siddhavayu also. So there are some variations in the name, but there is no dispute that she had received a proper Shaiva Diksha from her Kulaguru. And later, according to some legends, she also received what is called a Shaktipat Diksha from Swami Paramananda Tirth in course of her spiritual quest. And she was well versed in the Sanskrit language, the Agama, Yoga, and Trika philosophy. So Trika is the traditional name of the philosophy which is currently called Kashmir Shaivism. So as per the tradition, she can be called a Shaiva Kula Yogini of the highest order. And some real scholars on Kashmiri Shaiva tradition have actually described the course of her sadhana, how he started with what is called a Krama sadhana, then moved to Spanda sadhana, and finally adopted the Sahaja path in course of her spiritual journey. So this is a brief historical outline of Lalleshwari Lalde. And in all, many popular paintings, she is portrayed, like the way she is shown here in this picture. Lalla's poems are called Vak. So the word Vak itself is like an adaptation of the Sanskrit word Vaikari, which is like, the fourth stage of Vak. So that is the root of that word. So it is a very simple 4-line type poetry. So Lalleshwari was among the earliest poets of Kashmiri language. So till about 13th century, Sanskrit was the official and literary language in Kashmir. So we see so many Sanskrit scholars and poets like Abhinavagupta, Kalhana, Utpala, Anandavardhana, so many scholars in all fields of knowledge, Kavya, Vyakarana, Darshana, from Kashmir, because the Sanskrit learning was so prominent in Kashmir. So, but the people used to speak what is called Apabhramsha, from which the Kashmiri language kind of evolved. So just a century before Lalleshwari, the poetry started appearing in the Kashmiri language. And for all practical reasons, Lalleshwari can be called, the first major poet of this language. And her poetry is rich in Sanskrit words with almost no influence of Persian. Though Persian language started appearing in the North India, prominently from about 8th, 9th century itself, her poetry doesn't have influence of any of that. Nor there is influence of any Sufi philosophy. All scholars point that out. And there is a popular legend of her encounter with the Iranian Sufi called Shah Hamdan, alias Mir Sayyid Ali Hamdani, around 1380. But many Kashmiri scholars have written that this encounter is not very authentic. So it is said that there was a tandoor where the roti was made, and this person, Shah Hamdan, wanted to meet Lalleshwari. He could not find her anywhere. Once she saw her going towards that, and then she kind of jumped into the tandoor. And for a moment, he thought that, what is she doing? And then at a distance, she reappeared, fully decorated with jewels, etc. And then he could not comprehend. He thought that the Sufi thought she was playing some black magic, etc. So there is one such incident. So there are some other, legends also concocted saying that both of them met and they held philosophic discussion, etc. But the more authentic historical fact is that this Hamdani was the one who paved way for the Islamization of Kashmir. He impelled the Sultan Qutbuddin of Delhi, who was ruling at that time, and he destroyed many temples in Kashmir around that time. So we can easily comprehend that it was never a form of philosophical dialogue or anything. And then Lalla's chief disciple, Nand Rishi. So there are legends about him that he had attained some yogic consciousness at the very birth. So he refused to drink the breast milk of his own mother. But when Lalla took him, he kind of drank her breast milk, out of which he instantly became a kind of a siddha. And he had also written poetry. But in all the later chronicles, Muslim records, this Nand Rishi is named as Sheikh Nuruddin Wali. And this was the name given by none other than Shah Hamdan. So, many Kashmiri Hindu scholars who have written biographies of Lalla, they have refuted these legends. And unfortunately, we don't see any contemporary sources that talk about Lalla's life. But only, about 200 years after her advent, legends start appearing in Persian works. But there is an oral tradition that is preserved among Kashmiri Hindus, where some details about her life are known. For example, she was given the name Padmavati during her marriage, because there was a custom of renaming a girl at her marriage, etc. So, whatever is the case, Lalla was already a much revered guru and yogini in Kashmir. In fact, her fame was well known all over. Even when Shah Hamdan came to that place, in fact, he was a traveler, he went to many places, and that is the reason why he kind of wanted to see her in the first place. But then it appears that linking her memory to the Sufi lore was a deliberate attempt of the Muslim appropriation process, which can technically be called, what is called taqiyya. So taqiyya is an Islamic practice where one is allowed to tell lies to propagate religion. So he doesn't occur any sin or papa. Like in Hindu dharma, uttering a lie is always a sin. But in Islam, there is a doctrine of taqiyya where a person is allowed to lie to the hilt for the religion. So it appears that all this later Sufi appropriation is a part of that. That's what we have to conclude. So, but the most authentic source to know about Lalla is her own poetry, So now we can examine whether there is any trace of Sufism in her poetry. So there are about 200 plus numbers of walk. So I will take some 3-4, and when we walk through it, we can know the truth. So I don't know how to pronounce Kashmiri language. So I have given the poetry in the Devanagari script. I will just read out the meanings. Please pardon me for that. And there is a Sanskrit translation of Lal Wak, which is beautiful. It was done by Rajanak Bhaskaracharya, whom a friend of mine mentioned that this was actually a Kavyanama of the great Kashmiri Shaiva teacher Lakshman Ju, who lived in the last century. So I don't know how authentic it is, but the translations are beautiful, the Sanskrit ones. So here is a verse. Yadeva shatkam te deva tadeva cha mama prabho niyokta tvam niyojya aham tasyasti tyavayor bhida. The 6 you have, the same 6 I have. But Shyamgala, you have kept them aside. This has become the difference between you and me. You are the lord of these, but I am like a slave of those. They give me panchas. So this is a verse. So, this sounds very mystical. What is this 6, etc.? So unless someone really is familiar with the Tika Siddhanta concepts, it's impossible to decode this poetry. There is nothing in Sufism which will give explanation for all this. So the 6 I have means the 6 kanchukas, what are called the layers of consciousness. So they are Niyati, Kala, Raga, Vidya, Kala, and Maya. We can kind of think of as what is called koshas in Vedanta. So they are layers which envelop the consciousness. And the 6 you have. So this she addresses Shiva, whom she calls Shyamagala. Shyamagala means one whose neck is black, Nilakanta. So they are the 6 qualities or Aishwarya of Shiva. like Maya Shakti, Sarvakartritva, Sarvajñatva, Purnatva, Nityatva, and Vyapakatva. So in a sense, this is like what differentiate the play of Jiva and Brahman and their inherent qualities. So that's what is, of course, we can go deep into this concept, but for want of time, I'm skipping all that. So we can see how deeply philosophical and rooted in the Trika tradition this poetry is. Here is another verse. A Brahmandam Nabhito Yena Nityam Omkarakyo Mantra Eko Dhritoyam Kritva Chittam Tad Vimarshaika Saram Kim Tasyanyair Mantra Vrindair Vidheyam. So here she extols the glory of sustained pranayama practice and the yoga siddhi attained by it. He from whose navel steadfastly proceeds in its upward course, Omkara, the syllable Om, and not but it, nothing but the Omkara, and for whom the Kumbhaka forms a bridge to the Brahmarandhra. So Brahmarandhra is a very subtle kind of nerve center that is spoken in all the yoga texts. He bears in his mind the one and only mantra, which is Om, and of what benefit to him are 1,000 mantras. So in this verse, one of the things that these Sufi mystic propagators say, that Lalla speaks very low of mantras and rituals and sometimes even image worship like Murti Puja, etc. But that kind of viewpoint has nothing to do with Sufism, because in many Hindu texts themselves, like Yoga Vasishta, for example, Murti Puja is criticized as some kind of like children playing with toys. A real sadhaka who is in the yoga path will start with those, but quickly move towards meditation and contemplation. So that view has nothing to do with Sufism. So that's what we need to see. And here is another verse, which so beautifully speaks about Atma Samarpana Bhava. So, which is spoken by many Hindu acharyas. Karomi yat karma tadeva puja, vadami yat chapi tadeva mantraha, yadeva chayati tathaiva yoga, dravyam tadevasti mamatra tantra. Whatever work I did, that was worship. Whatever I uttered with my tongue, that was a mantra. This recognition, this alone became one with my body. That this alone is the essence of scriptures of Paramashiva. So, for a jnani or a yogi who is always immersed in the self, who has become like Brahma Bhava, whatever work he or she does, that is worship. Whatever he or she speaks, that is mantra. They don't have to worship separately or chant mantra separately. So that is the highest state that Lalla speaks in this poetry. And this is so similar to there's another verse in Shiva Manasa Puja of Shankaracharya, which is very popular. So where he says, Atma Tvam Girija Matihi, O Shiva, you are my self, and Girija, Parvati, is my buddhi. Sahachara pranaha. So your ganas, Shiva ganas, they are all my pranas, the vital airs in my body. Shariram griham. Your abode, Kailasa, is my own body. Pujate vishayopa bhogarachana. Whatever sense pleasures I am enjoying, like eating, etc. All this is your puja. Nidra samadhi sthitihi. When I sleep, that is like samadhi. Sanchara pradayo pradakshina vidhihi. If I just move around, that is your pradakshina. Stotrani sarva giro. All my speech is your stotra. Yadyat karma karomi tattadakhilam Shambho tavaradhana. Whatever work I do, Shambho, that is your aradhana. See, it is so much aligned to the Vedantic and Trika philosophy. And here is another verse where she says, Shivova Keshavo Vapi, Jinova Druhinopiva, Samsara Roge Nakrantam, Abalam Mam Chikitsat. Shiva, Keshava, Jina, Kamalajanatha. The name could be any. I am helpless and a weak woman. Save me from the ocean of transmigration. You are the one, you are the one, you are the one. So in the Kashmiri language, it sounds like a mantra. Suhva, 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 Suh. So here she refers Shiva, Vishnu, Jina, and Kamalajanatha is Buddha. So such references of calling multiple divinities is very common in Sanskrit poems. But note that there is no Sufi or any Islamic reference in this verse. And there is another proof that is shining at our face that why Lalleshwari simply cannot be a Sufi. So whoever says that, we can ask them, show me another saint like Lalleshwari. Can they show? Are there women saints? Are there yoginis? None. But in the Hindu tradition, we have Shiva Yogini saints from other parts of Bharat. So we have Karaikal Ammayar, who is shown in the middle in this picture. So she was a great saint who lived in the 5th, 6th century CE in Tamil Nadu. So she attained very, very high spiritual state, and to such a level that she couldn't bear the flesh of her body. So she asked a boon from Shiva that make me like a skeleton, so that nobody will think I am a beautiful woman. And then she was made like that, with sagging breasts and a skeletal form. And in sculptures, she is always portrayed like that, Karaikal Ammayar. And there was another saint, Akka Mahadevi, from the Karnataka Veerashaiva tradition, who actually the legend is similar to Lalleshwari. So she got married, and obviously the mother-in-law could not tolerate her spiritual quest. She left home, and her poetry is also deeply yogic and mystical, similar to Lalleshwari. Now let's move on to Ras Khan. So we can say that Lalleshwari was born as a Hindu. So obviously it's impossible that she can even be called a Sufi. She had a Diksha and all that. What about Ras Khan? Was he a Krishnite Sufi? Let's probe that. So Ras Khan, he was born as Sayyid Ibrahim Khan in 1548. So some say he was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. That's the majority view. There is another view which says that he was actually born in Delhi. But from the childhood, he kind of lived in the Delhi areas. And he attained Mahasamadhi as Ras Khan, not as Ibrahim Khan, in 1628 in Vrindavan. And this name Ras Khan is a very interesting one, so the Khan actually becomes Khan also, so which was like a royal title. So Khan in Hindi also means treasure. So his name can be interpreted as Ras Khan. He was a treasure of Rasa. Rasa of what? Rasa of Krishna Bhakti. So that is why he puts his name as Ras Khan in all his poems. He renounced the Islamic ways of life very early in the youth, and he accepted Sri Krishna as the supreme God and officially became a Vaishnava. How? Because he got Vaishnava Diksha from Gosai Vithaldas Maharaj of the Vallabha Sampradaya. But Goswami Vithaldas came in the same lineage as Vallabhacharya. So there are many legends associated with life. that once he joined a group of Muslim pilgrims going towards Mecca, and when they were on the way, he saw a party singing songs on Krishna. His mind was automatically drawn towards that, and he just left that toli of Muslim pilgrims and went along with the singers, and that's how he got into Krishna Bhakti. And there is another legend where he was always attached to one particular friend, and then at some point when some Vaishnavas were pointing out, if someone has to love somebody, it has to be like the love of Raskhan for that boy. You should love Krishna like that. So then this punched him and he became a Krishna Bhakta. So there are a few legends like that. And his life history is narrated not in any Muslim text, but texts like Bhava Prakash, Bhakta Kalpadhruma, and Chaurasi Vaishnavan Ki Varta, which contains the stories of many other Hindu saints and bhaktas. So Sujan Raskhan and Prem Vatika. So these are Raskhan's works. And his poetry is filled with Krishna Bhakti and description of Krishna Leela in vivid colors like Bal Leela, Kunj Leela, Ras Leela, Panghat Leela, Dan Leela. There are a few poems on Shiva, Ganga, and also on Holi festival by him. And the language of his Hindi poetry is Khadi Boli, Brij Bhasha dialect. It is filled with Sanskrit words and idioms. See, it's important. Though he was, he had a Muslim upbringing and he was a scholar of Persian, his poetry doesn't have Persian influence at all. And literally no influence of Persian or Arabic. This poetry in literary terms is of the same genre as the Ashtachap, poets, like 8 Krishna Bhakti poets, Surdas, etc. So it is said that he also translated Bhagavata Purana into Persian, but it's not clear if this work is still available. It appears that it is gone, but the legends mention this. So if it was available, that could be used. Perhaps it could even be made available in Iran, where people can read Bhagavata Purana. And some of the popular poems, I'll just take a few, 2, 3, not more than that. Look at this poem. Ses Ganesh Mahesh Dinesh Suresahu Jahi Nirantar Gaven Jahi Anadi Anant Akhand Ached Abhed Suved Bataven Narad se Sukh Vyas Raten Pachihari Taum Puni Par na Paven Tahi Ahir ki Chohariya Chachiya Bhari Chach pe Nach na Jave. Does it sound anything even remotely connected to Sufi to you? What he says, Adishesha, Ganesha, Mahesha, Dinesha, Suresha, they all sing his glories always, without beginning, without end, non-separable, non-destructible, without difference, Abhed. So say the great Vedas about him. From Narada to Vyasa, sages keep talking about him. Still they cannot exhaust or go over him. But this little cowherd girl, he uses a very Dehati dialect there. Ahir ki chohariya. What she does, she makes such a godhead dance to her tunes. For what? In return for a small cup of buttermilk. So Krishna goes and demands that you give me that buttermilk. Chachiya bhari chach. Then she says, no, you dance and then I'll give. So what kind of a depth of devotional feeling and bhakti that is visible in these lines. There's another popular poem. Manush hant wahi raskhan bason mili gokul gaon ke gwaran jo pasu hant kaha bas mero charanit nand ki dhenu manjharan pahan hant wahi giri ko जो धर्यो कर छत्र पुरंदर धारण, जो खग हों तो बसेरा करो, मिली कालिंदी कूल कदम्ब की डार. Says Raskan, if I were to be born as a human, let me be born, living amidst the cowherd boys of Gokula. If it were an animal, let me be among the cows that are taken for grazing by him every day. If it were a lifeless stone, let me be the one that he lifted as umbrella, that is Govardhanagiri, to save his devotees from Indra. If it were to be a bird, let me have a cage on the branches of the Kadamba tree on the banks of Yamuna. See, first he talks about rebirth here. Does Sufism accept rebirth? Someone being born as human or animal or bird. And he talks about the Leelas of Krishna. So in whatever birth he is born, he wants to be associated somehow with Krishna. So that is the spirit of this poetry. And the other work, Prema Vatika. So this is often quoted by the Sufi propagandists that Prem is the essence of all that, you leave Krishna, everything. So Prem is the essence of Raskan's poetry. So we can count him as Sufi. But what is the kind of Prem that Raskan is talking about? That's important. So here are a few verses from that work. Prem Ayan Shri Radhika, Prem Baran Nandanand, Prem Vatika ke do, Malin Mali Dwand. The dwelling of love is Shri Radhika. The son of Nanda is love's color. Both are the divine gardeners of the garden of love, he says. Another verse he says, Lokaved Marjad Sab, Laj Kaj Sandeh, Det Bahaye Prem Kari, Vidhi Nishedh Kone. The rules of the world, the rules of the Veda, shame, works, and doubt, all these you give up in the path of love. For what are regulations and negations in this path? Vidhi, Nishedh, both are not there. And in another verse, he says, Shastran Padhi Pandit Bhaye, Kai Maulvi Quran, Juye Prem Janyo Nahi, Kaha Kiyo Raskhan. Reading the Shastras, you become Pandit. Reciting the Quran, a Maulvi. But if you have not known love, what is the use? Asks Raskan. See, it's very important to know that the love or prem that he refers in all these poems is neither Sufi nor some secular type love or nothing mystic. It is the prem which is mentioned very clearly in the Vaishnava tradition, in the Narada Bhakti Sutra. What is bhakti? So the Narada says, Satvasmin Parama Prema Rupa. It is nothing but the embodiment of love. So Parama Prema Rupa is the word used by the Narada. And the same concept Raskan says in that verse. So his prem is not like a Sufi prem or some secular prem. He says that the color of prem is Nandanand and the prem ayani is Shri Radhika. So there is no prem without them for him. And when he says no rules and regulations, this is not any rebellious or revolutionary idea or anything like that. It is derived from, it is spoken in many Vedantic and Bhakti texts that, in the Narada Bhakti Sutra itself, two kind of lajja are spoken about. A bhakta should not have lajja. For example, he shouldn't feel somewhat inhibited to sing and dance in public the glory of Krishna. So we see when you go to Mathura on a special day, so people simply, you see a rapture and ecstasy. Nobody has any inhibition. They just sing and dance. So what is this inhibition? So the Bhakti texts talk about Loka Lajja and Veda Lajja. Loka Lajja is a normal worldly shame, which any person would have. Should I sing? Should I dance? Should I tell the name of Krishna in public? What will the others think? That is Loka Lajja. The Veda Lajja is the inhibition born out when somebody learns a lot and into Vedas, Puranas and Shastras, and that itself becomes an inhibition for him. So both Lajja should be given up. That's what he says. And that is nothing related to Sufism. So his word Vidhi Nishedh Ko Ner, it comes straight from a phrase of Shankaracharya, Nistrai Gunye Pati Vicharataha, Ko Vidhi Ko Nishedha. What regulations, what negations? The same thing he has spoken in Hindi. And this is Raskhan's Samadhi Mandir at Mahaban near Mathura. So does it look like a Sufi tomb? It is a Hindu Bhakt's Samadhi, and it is a Tirthasthan for Krishna Bhakts, where there is some particular tithi, I forgot to mention that here, on which many Bhakts go here and they sing the songs of Raskhan as some kind of Guru Puja for him, like the way it is done for all other Hindu saints and gurus. So Nirguna of Vedanta in Hindu Dharma is not the same as formless God idea of Islam. They're so completely different, because the God of Islam is a God of rewards and punishments. So he rewards the faithfuls and punishes the kafir. But the Nirguna of Vedanta it's not even a person. It is a very subtle philosophical idea. Even it's beyond gender, beyond anything. So there is absolutely no relation between both these concepts. And the Ekam, which is the oneness of Hindu Dharma, is nothing related to the monotheistic idea of one God of Abrahamic religions. See, the Ekam of the Hindu Dharma talks about oneness. It's a quality. It is not a numerical one. But the Abrahamic God idea talks about a particular God with a particular name, whether it is Yehovah or the Almighty or the Allah. Just that one, the personage. So they are vastly different. And the prema or bhakti of Hindu Dharma is not the same as ishq or divanagi or any such thing of the Sufi. We already saw that. And the yogic and bhakti states of consciousness, which are elaborated in great detail in the Hindu text, is nothing related to some kind of ecstasy states of the Sufi where they sing and dance and close their eyes, etc. There is no scientific or a formal description of any such states of consciousness in the Sufi literature. That exists only in Hindu Dharma. And most importantly, Sufism, the coolness of Sufism is derived from mysticism, music and dance, etc. But historically, Sufism is not just that. They have, the Sufis had a very violent history of jihad, bigotry, aggression and temple destruction in India. In fact, one historian was telling me last week that, there is no Sufi tomb or mazar in India which is not built over a demolished Hindu temple. Almost every one of these Sufi shrines, including the most famous ones, have actually been built over destroyed Hindu temples. So such has been the history of the Sufis. So Hindu saints are not Sufi mystics, and it is an insult to Hindu culture and the memory of those saints to call them that way. And finally, so you can ask one genuine question: if a Muslim or a non-Hindu is interested, deeply interested in Lalleshwari or Raskhan, what can he do? He can always enjoy and appreciate Hindu literature, music, art as they are. So call it as Hindu poetry. You can always enjoy it and appreciate it. Who prevents you to do that, from doing that? No need to de-Hinduize them, because that's a ploy to dilute and eventually appropriate them.
I don't know anything about Sufism or Laleshwari, as I heard the name now only. So, isn't it not appropriate to brand them as Hindu saints, since that is not the name in which they operated? So, they operated in their own spiritual way. So, isn't it the other way around, that we have to
What do
throw
you
some
mean
light
other
on
way?
what is Sufism? So that will repel the ideology of Laleshwari or any other Hindu saints. They are trying to de-Hinduize, right? Isn't it the
Okay.
other way around?
No. First of all, see, as I told you, Hindus never have any doubt about these saints. Okay? I mean, how can someone, whatever Sufism may be, okay? So we all know that it is a school of Islam, and Sufism is may have some differences with, say, other sects like Sunni Islam, which is the mainstream Islam, or the Wahhabi school of it, whatever may be the case. But some of the fundamental tenets of Islam, right, like about Allah or Muhammad being the only last prophet of Allah, and the concept of Mumin and Kafir. I mean, does Sufism reject any of that? Not at all, right? If they reject it, it can never be a sect of Islam at all. So going by that yardstick, how can someone who took a Shiva Diksha, a Kula Diksha in the Kaula tradition, and a Vaishnava Diksha, and did the sadhana as per that all through their life, even with any remote logic, how can you call them Sufi mystics? I mean, doesn't it look absurd? Would you call Bhagavad Gita as a Sufi text? Would you call Shankaracharya as a Sufi? So why would you call Laleshwari or Raskan as Sufis? Simply because they lived in the Mughal era.
I have actually two questions. So first thing is that if how the Sufis are considering as a Krishna, as a messenger of the God, or as a prophet, or as a Allah itself. And second question is that do you think that quoting his poetry is very clearly saying that it's all about the logic and realization of the bhakti movement versus the al-taqiyya concept? So Muslim historians try to drag the Raskhan into that direction using the al-taqiyya concept. So just your two comments are needed in these my two questions. Thank you.
See, Sufism doesn't actually have any philosophical explanation of how they would even view as Krishna, right? So some of these the Muslim poets of the modern era, like Allama Iqbal, for example. So he called Ram as Imam-e-Hind, right? So what does that mean? Is that Ram is like a leader or king of India. He was a noble king, a historical character. But Ram can never be accepted as a Bhagavan or a Godhead in any school of Islam, be it Sufism, be it Sunnism, or any school of Islam, because it's completely against the tenet of Islam. So obviously, so what they say is that treat Krishna as some kind of symbol. That is so absurd, because for Raskhan, Krishna was not just some symbol. I just quoted two poems. You read Sujan Raskhan. It is full and full, completely immersed with the Leelas of Krishna, and it is no different from any other Krishna Bhakti poet, say Surdas or Mirabai or the Alvar saints of Tamil. Raskhan's poetry is so. If without quoting the name, if you just give the poetry, you can't even figure out that it was written by Raskhan. So how can you call him a Sufi? right? So the second thing you asked about what Muslim, I don't think Muslim scholars are perhaps doing this. It's some of these leftist historians and some of these scholars who want to portray what is called a syncretic culture. They say that the Bhakti movement itself is not really a Hindu movement. It is some kind of syncretic culture. It was a khichdi of some Sufism, some Rama Bhakti, some yoga, this kind of thing. So they want to create a discourse like that. So they pick either a Lalleshwari or even Kabir Das, for example. Kabir Das has also been majorly misrepresented. So he belongs to the Nirguni stream, right? So he also took Diksha from Ramananda, who was a Vaishnava guru. So technically he can never be admitted into any sect, any school of Islam. So this is a discourse to, as I said, de-Hinduize and to confuse the already confused Hindus. This is what I see this opinion as.
So first of all, Jatayu, thank you for essentially bringing all this to the fore, because I have heard about Raskan but not about Lalleshwari. I just want to know, considering you have done all this research and everything, have you tried to reach out to Amar Chitkatha folks and tell them about this thing? Have you made that attempt?
I wrote a Facebook post and tagged them. Maybe there should be a more concerted representation to them, saying that perhaps even a legal recourse, right? Because they write Lalleshwari and then just write Sufi mystic. It's like an insult to the Hindu Dharma. At least if they write as a poet of a Shaivite and Sufi tradition, at least there is okay. There's a confusion, but they straight away write Sufi mystic. So her Shaiva identity is not even there. So that is atrocious. So something needs to be done with Amar Chitkatha on that.
At the outset, thank you, sir, for the enlightening lecture. I have a question. I have never come across any historians calling Hindu saints as Sufi saints. Okay, what I feel is it's a new term coined by anti-social elements, the other anti-Hindu historians. Don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. But it is kind of getting mainstreamed. Unfortunately, that's the problem.
Did Sufi association or making her a Sufi start from the Kashmiri Sufis in the 18th and 19th centuries or later? What are the works from the Kashmir Hindus that one can do, that one can go to for Lalla's biography and translation?
Okay. Yes. So as I mentioned, actually the attempt starts from the 1600s itself, somewhat earlier than 19th century, because the Nanda Rishi, Nund Rishi was given a Islamic name, and everyone knew that Nund Rishi was a disciple of Lalla, and Lalla was a tremendous personality in the Kashmiri culture. So and the language. So there has been a kind of attempt from the earlier times. But you read any proper biography of Lalla. So I referred some 3-4 books. Maybe I can send it as an email, which can be shared when this video is put across. So there is a book by name Parag in Hindi, Parag Lalleshwari Walk, by Pushkar Nath Raina, who is a great scholar and professor. So it's a Hindi book. It is published by Utpal Publications, Delhi. It's a wonderful book. The walks are given in the Devanagari Lipi as well as the Kashmiri version is given, and word by word meaning is given. And there is a chapter called Aitihasik Prishtabhumi in this book, where he refutes all these encounters with the Sufis and all that. There is another book, Shiva Yogini Lalleshwari, written by Dr. Yogeshwari Bhatt. It's an English book. This is published by the Art of Living Foundation. You can refer to that. And there is another very authentic book, Sayings of Lalleshwari, Lalla Vakyani. So this was published in the 1920s itself by two Indologists, Sir George Grayson and Lionel Burnett. So this is also available. So this is also a wonderful book. So the walks are all given in the Devanagari Lipi and the Roman transliteration. And there is a lot of analysis about Lalla's language, poetry, and the philosophy also. So these three books you can refer.
Sir, you said that Ras Khan's language was free from the Persian language.
Yes.
Or whatever it is.
Yes.
Could it be free when he was a Sanskrit? I mean, when he was a scholar both in Sanskrit and his own tongue, okay, the Persian language. Could it be free? And what is wrong if there is some sort of linguistic osmosis? Because that would be enriching the Sanskrit language, if only when he had used a few terms there. Because that is the way in which language grows.
Right. Yeah. So let me answer it in two ways. It's absolutely possible. There are people who are proficient in multiple languages, and when they write poetry or prose in one language, it absolutely doesn't have the influence of the other. Right? When someone who knows English quite well, when he writes Tamil poetry, was influenced and of a specific genre, this is for a regular scholar. But Ras Khan was not just a scholar or a poet, right? He was a full-fledged Krishna Bhakta. In fact, he completely immersed himself in Krishna Bhakti. So obviously, when his poetry found an expression, it followed a pattern that was already present in the Krishna Bhakti tradition, like Surdas, the Ashtachop Kavis, right, who flourished in the Mathura Vrindavan region. So obviously, it wouldn't have any Persian or Arabic terms. It's very natural. There is nothing called right or wrong. But there is also a mention that before he went into this writing his own poetry, he had translated Srimad Bhagavat into Persian. Unfortunately, it looks like I searched in many the books on Ras Khan. There was no mention of whether that survives or not. It's just there in the legends. And the third thing is that the core Sufi poetry, right, written by the Sufi poets, is so much Persian. So whether it is written, even when it is written in Urdu, for example, it follows the grammar of the Urdu, which is similar to Hindi, but the vocabulary is all from Persian. You read, let's say, poetry of Mirza Ghalib, for example, ghazals or shairis, etc. So there is the whole character of the poetry changes, isn't it? So it's impossible that he would bring in Persian language when he was so immersed in Krishna Bhakti.
It is evident that the misappropriation of Hindu scriptures is being carried out since long. In Tamil Nadu, Christian missionaries claimed that Tiruvallur is a Christian. How to stop this misappropriation and counter it?
Yeah. See, the misappropriation is quite absurd, as we all know. So sometimes such misappropriation receive a political patronage, unfortunately, right? Which is what happened in Tamil Nadu. So a baseless claim like Thiruvalluvar was a Maharishi. Any Tamil who has read Tirukkural knows that his book is divided into 3 chapters, Aram, Porul, Inbam, which exactly means Dharma, Artha, Kama. So he was like any other Dharma Shastra writer in the Hindu tradition. And there are so many references all through his text that it is nothing but a Hindu Dharma Shastra. But at the start of 20th century, this Dravidian movement came. In fact, this is a wonderful example of a successful de-Hinduization. A de-Hinduization which has been in the works for 100 years. Okay, it actually started at the start of 20th century, saying that Tirukkural is not, it doesn't belong to any religion. Tirukkural is a Tamil ethical book, Tamil Marai, they call it. So how is it possible that a language have its own Dharma Shastra? I mean, the idea of Dharma is obviously, in the Indian context, is attached to a spiritual tradition. Either it is a Vedic tradition or a Buddhist tradition or a Jain tradition. It's one of those traditions. It's the things like secularism were not known 2000 years back. So first what happened is Tirukkural was made a Tamil saint, a secular saint, and then so he was de-Hinduized. That the whole Tirukkural was successfully de-Hinduized by offering some stupid interpretations. It is so. I had actually given a talk some 3 years back in Swadeshi Indology conference on de-Hinduization of Tamil literature, where so some close to 100 books were written saying that Tirukkural, Thiruvalluvar and Tirukkural are secular books. So once this thing, the de-Hinduization reached a certain stage, the Christians came into the scene. Then they started saying that Thiruvalluvar was actually a Christian saint. He was inspired by Saint Thomas, who had come to India, etc., etc. So the next round of crackpot theories and the fraudulent claims. So the moral of the story is that if you allow the de-Hinduization to continue for a long time, it goes into very risky and dangerous levels where so many people start believing it. So in fact, Tamil Nadu is a classic example where this has happened to Tirukkural. So now you have to give some shock treatment in Tamil Nadu case. So you have to keep shouting from every forum saying that no, Thiruvalluvar is a Hindu saint, this, that, Tamil culture is Hindu culture and all that.
Yeah, hi Jadaji. Actually, my question was misunderstood. What I meant to ask was, in Tamil Nadu, as you know, that EVR is known as the Vaikam hero, but a simple Google search would tell that he is not the Vaikam hero, and some others were doing that agitation. So what my question is, aren't we supposed to read more about Sufism or Christianity to understand that it cannot, Abrahamic beliefs cannot incorporate any of the Hindu beliefs? We are always in the defensive mode to justify that Laleshwari doesn't belong to Sufism, but we have to read more about Sufism to understand that it cannot incorporate Laleshwari, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, but see, this is a short talk. So in fact, the very premise is absurd, right? So you don't have to study Sufism to even tell that how Laleshwari doesn't belong to Sufism. Okay, that is another type of an argument. I already put that. See, my last slide has those bullet points, right? So so on each of those bullet points, we can actually have a detailed talk, right? How Nirguna is not the formless God concept of Islam. How Ekam is not. So how Prem of the Bhakti tradition is not the Ishq or Divanagi of Sufi tradition. They are so totally different. Yeah, so yes, so I'm not a scholar of Persian or Muslim lore or Sufism, but I have read basic things about the Islamic theology and Sufism enough to say that this whole claim is absurd. So there are Hindu scholars who have actually critically analyzed Sufism. I think Coenrod Elst has written. Ram Swarup has, or Sitaram Goel, I think, Psychology of Prophetism. In the book, he has analyzed. Hindu view of Christianity and Islam. That's another book of Ram Swarup, where he has done that analysis. Dr. David Frawley has written a detailed monograph on Sufism. Yes, so we must study. Whoever wants to undertake the study of our enemy philosophies, which we can call as Purva Paksha, they are very much encouraged to undertake that. But just to establish this claim, I didn't even have to go that far.
Sir, you were talking about taking a legal recourse against these kind of people who are propagating literature to support that these personalities were Sufis.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know that do you have come across any references or footnotings in their literature which supports their theory, or they are just making this out of thin air?
Yeah. So okay. So the Amar Chitra Katha is a more damaging thing, right? Because it's a comics book. It's not an academic paper or anything, but an extremely popular one, which all Hindu children read. So when they put such an outrageous thing on their cover, so you have to take them to task, asking them, how can you put that? So if it gets to a legal point, so they have to back up their claim, right? Why do they want to call Lalleshwari a Sufi mystic? So I think I'm sure that there has to be some Hindu organization who have to take them to court for this, or at least to put them pressure, send a notice. If they apologize and say that they won't use that, then it's okay. It will be a moral victory. Either of this needs to be done. In case of academics fellows, so they would write some very long winding research papers. See these terms like Krishnite Sufi. You just go search Google Krishnite Sufi, you will see a few links. So one guy will return a research paper, another guy will reference that research paper, and then they will say, so this is how this industry keeps building. I told you about the case of Tirukkural in Tamil, right? Exactly how it happened. Now we have to really literally break our heads to denounce all that 100 years of mispropaganda. In fact, all through these 100 years, the true Tamil scholars were shouting, saying that this entire distortion, this misrepresentation is wrong. But unfortunately, since the Dravidian movement gained ascendancy, the de-Hinduization got so much fillip. But let us hope that won't happen in this case, and we will be able to arrest it.
Shardaji, you wanted to ask something about Andal?
See how these people are becoming vocal. Andal, for all. You know, Andal doesn't even, at least in case of Lalla, the Muslim rule was just starting in Kashmir. Raskhan was anyway born as a Muslim. But in case of Andal, Andal is supposed to have lived in 9th century in Tamil Nadu, where the first Islamic invasion into Tamil Nadu happened under Malik Gafur, which was in the 13th century, when the Srirangam and Madurai and Chidambaram temple were attacked. So even leave alone Sufism, even Islam would have been unknown in the 9th century in Tamil Nadu. How could someone get so arrogant to argue that Andal was a Sufi? This is horrible. You should just give a thrashing to that person.